Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today it's one of the big ones. We're going to be talking about the long-awaited comeback record from Metallica called Hardwired to Self-Destruct. They are a name that in the public consciousness is synonymous with metal. Of the big four in thrash, they're probably the one that leaps to mind the most recognizable, arguably the most successful, and one that I've never really talked about in great detail, most because the band has not released a lot of quality throughout my entire lifetime. Yep, folks, we're going to be talking about Metallica, the second of the big four that I have covered in 2016. And even though I'm no big fan of thrash metal, which probably didn't help that Megadeth review, I do tend to take a more forgiving picture of Metallica. For one, on a pure compositional and writing level, I found them a much more consistent and enjoyable group for a longer period of time than Megadeth. And even though I've got some individual issues with their 80s output, I definitely hold up albums like Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Injustice for All as iconic of the thrash metal genre, with Ride the Lightning probably being my own personal favorite. Seriously, that album rules. But here's the unfortunate truth of all that. That was in the 80s. I don't have the aversion to the Black Album that some Metallica fans do, but it really was a sign of the records to come. On some level, I appreciated Metallica venturing out of thrash for Load and Reload, but they seemed to lose a lot of the interesting virtuoso musicianship and melodic chops and focus that helped their 80s work stand out. They really were chasing trends in the mainstream, and somehow Saint Anger was even worse. Plagued with production issues, sloppy writing, and no solos, just really hit a sour note for me. Death Magnetic was a return to form on some level in 2008. There was still some production issues courtesy of an abuse of compression, which did nothing to highlight the melodies, but it at least was a Metallica sound I could mostly get behind. But they then followed it with working with Lou Reed on Lulu, and really that album is a video in and of itself. But let me say this for the record, it's not a good album at all, but especially lyrically, it's a sort of fascinating failure that's extremely entertaining to dissect. But the broader point of all this is that since I was born in 1990, the vast majority of music that Metallica has released has been decent at best, and that's kind of dispiriting going into a new album. And really, I had no clue what to expect either. Metallica has been all over the map throughout their career, and given that they now put together a double album of material with no songwriting contributions from Kirk Hammett, and I hadn't heard any of the new singles going in, I figured this would be my big chance to really dig in deep. So after going through the entire discography, what did we get with this? Well, I'm of a couple minds. On the one hand, you could make the very credible argument this is some of their strongest work since the 1980s. Not quite as consistently vicious and energetic, it's definitely showing a closest thing to a return to form, especially in comparison with the work since the Black Album. On the other hand, though, there are still elements that have carried into Metallica's later work that hold back this record from being great. It's indulgent, there's some frustrating production choices, and I get the uneasy feeling that if Metallica had a little bit more oversight or pressure, they could have put together a far tighter album. Of course, that was never gonna happen. They're on their own label now, they're all filthy rich, and they've got more than enough money and control to ignore pretty much everyone else's opinion. But that indulgence does take away from a thrash project that could have been great instead of decent, pretty good at best. So okay, let me start off by saying that the fundamentals of Metallica are still mostly coming through here. The rhythm guitar that James Hetfield is swamped with fuzz and crunch really has been the most consistent unsung hero of Metallica throughout their entire careers. Kirk Hammett's guitar solos can be impressive if a little bit interchangeable at points on this album, and the rhythm section, well, okay, we'll get to that. Hell, while I won't say that James Hetfield brings as much visceral presence as he could outside of moments like Spit Out the Bone, with some careful overdubs on songs like Halo on Fire, he does have some potent presence. He sounds pretty damn good. Hell, Halo on Fire also holds up on its songcraft as well. The melodic shifts are well executed, we get one of the better solos on this album, and it's one of the few songs on this album that uses its time well, the others being the fuzzy, jagged grind of Now That We're Dead, and the frenetic Spit Out the Bone, which is easily one of the most fast-paced and wild thrash songs Metallica has made in decades, and easily one of their best. Hell, even though I wouldn't say this album ever consistently hits that pace, melodically it does hit some solid moments, like the synchronized guitar work on Atlas Rise and Dream No More, or the more controlled melodies that drive confusion. But you know, right out of the gate we run into production issues, and to precisely nobody's surprise, the majority of them are with the bass guitar and the drums. I know that Lars Ulrich is a contentious drummer in some circles, but my larger issues come in how his kit is mic'd and processed. Who the hell thought that flat tapping kick drum tone had anywhere close to enough presence to balance out the rhythm guitar? And it's not like the drums are buried either. That kick drum often sticks out like a sore thumb in the mix, and compared to the fainter cymbals and the much sharper snares, it's a baffling choice, especially when the songs aren't at a fast enough tempo to obscure or blur over those kick drum hits. Now, this could have been alleviated by giving Robert Trujillo's bass a little bit more presence, which is so inconsistent that if it's barely there, it often ends up leaving many of the first disc songs lacking some of that lower foundation they need. Bizarrely, the bass does get a little bit more volume on the second disc on songs like Here Comes Revenge and Am I Savage, which are both some of the weakest tracks on this project. The former, which opens up with a guitar line that sounds like a screaming cat, and the latter that switches into this gummy midsection that sounds way clunkier than it should. What's kind of frustrating is that a song later on, Murder 1, a tribute to Motorhead that sounds nothing like Motorhead, and is in fact named after Lemmy's bass amp, but the low end, that bass guitar is so painfully inadequate on that song. But that's only peripheral to the bigger issue, namely that the songs on the second disc can drag pretty hard. I get trying for some experimentation, but not only are the tones and shifts chosen not all that far removed from typical modern Metallica, the melodies aren't nearly as dynamic or interesting, and the grooves don't really suffice either. Take Man Unkind, a song that's intended as a tribute to the black metal band Mayhem. There's some groove to it, but it feels awkwardly constructed, especially with the solo, and this was a prime place that if Metallica wanted to touch on black metal, if only for a flourish to pay tribute, and they don't even bother. No blast beats, no tremolo riffs, not even screamed or growled vocals. It just strikes me as real blown potential. You want to experiment, you've got the ability to experiment, why didn't you even try? But, you know what, maybe that was too much to hope for. This is Metallica after all, and I wasn't really expecting them to push the envelope that hard. They're not that kind of band. And you want proof of that assertion? Look at the lyrics and themes. The title isn't kidding, as thematically this album is looking to explore the reasons why humanity has the instinct to implode or destroy oneself, mostly settling on succumbing to our various vices. Moth the Flame targets obsession with fame and of course social media, because of course Metallica would have an issue with that. Dream No More focuses on the summoning of Cthulhu, which James Hetfield pronounces as Cthulhu, which considering this is Metallica's fourth song about the subject, you'd think he'd have the name right by now. And Halo on Fire plays a little bit more abstractly, playing in fallen angel motifs that fear retribution and don't seek forgiveness for their sins. More intriguingly, we get songs like Now That We're Dead, about the reunion with a loved one after passing, or Spit Out the Bone, it would focus on literally succumbing to the machine. Hell, Am I Savage might use some pretty basic werewolf symbolism, and Here Comes Revenge takes the abstract song structures of Load and Reload for the abstract concept of vengeance and embodying it, but it holds together in a baseline sort of way. But then you got songs like Confusion, which is about PTSD, and yeah, on a broad level PTSD can trigger suicidal impulses, but tonally the fit of that song feels questionable within the album, as it raises some very murky questions about agency. And then when you include Murder 1, yeah, it doesn't fit with the themes at all, unless Metallica's trying to make a statement about how Lemmy's lifestyle led to his death, which I sincerely hope and suspect they weren't trying to do, but even if so, it doesn't really fit. The larger issue is, well, I've already alluded to it. Most of the subject matter here isn't far removed from Metallica's usual material. It's not bad, but it doesn't surprise me either. And this would be fine enough. The writing's got a rough-edged basic wallop that's always worked for this band, but let's be honest here. Metallica is over 35 years in the industry, and they've had a prime opportunity to push for more on the second disc, and they really didn't. Hell, not even on the first disc here either. But really, that's nitpicking, and it's not even surprising nitpicking. Overall, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, it's fine. It's got some standout tracks, a couple great solos, some good writing, and really is the best we could expect from Metallica at this point. But at the same time, maybe it's my own ambivalence towards thrash, but for a band with this sort of longevity, you'd think they'd bring more to the table over the course of 2 discs for a double album. As it is, many of the songs we get, they either run long or they run short on ideas. And the fact that the bass or drum production doesn't nearly flesh out the low end nearly as well as it should is not a good sign. Again, these guys have been making thrash longer than I've been alive. This should not be an issue at this point. As such, for me, very strong 6 out of 10. And if you're gonna check it out, I'd take the first disc, spit out the bone, and throw out the rest. It would have made for a much stronger project overall. But fans of Metallica, you've got a new album. I hope you enjoyed a lot more than I did. Because otherwise, it's worth a listen. Check it out, I guess. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here, so anybody who wants to tell me how wrong I am about this Metallica album, there's your chance. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. But any song request, I just opened up my new Spectrum Pulse Patreon, where you guys get a little bit more insight and control of my upcoming schedule. So click over there, and the link is right here. Gives you a little bit more idea how this whole thing is going to start working from here on out. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.